The letter wasn't supposed to exist. That's what the attorney said when she placed the manila envelope on her desk and pushed it toward me with 2 fingers like it might burn. "Dr. Chen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "your husband's firm sent this to the wrong address. It came to our office by mistake." But once I read it, I couldn't pretend I hadn't. I remember staring at that envelope the way you'd stare at a scalpel left in the wrong tray. Something precise, something dangerous, something that didn't belong. 3 years into my marriage, I thought I knew every corner of my life. I was a trauma surgeon at Massachusetts General, the youngest woman to lead a cardiac unit in the hospital's history. I saved lives for a living, but when I opened that envelope and read what was inside, I couldn't save my own. It was a custody petition, filed in secret. My husband James had already retained a family lawyer, already gathered financial documents, already listed our home as a contested asset. The filing date was 6 weeks before our 3rd anniversary. He'd been planning to leave me while planning our anniversary dinner, and the co-petitioner listed as a character witness, my best friend since medical school, Vanessa Cole, the same woman who'd held my hand during my first solo surgery and told me, "You were born for this operating room?" I read the document 3 times. Then I asked the attorney, "Why are you showing me this?" She swallowed hard. "Because someone should have told you sooner." That sentence followed me out of her office, down the elevator, through the parking garage. Someone should have told you sooner. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel, staring at the concrete wall in front of me. Boston's skyline was somewhere above me, gleaming and indifferent. My hospital badge hung from the rearview mirror, swinging gently. Dr. Sarah Chen, cardiothoracic surgery. I'd spent 12 years earning that title, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, plus a fellowship that nearly broke me. I'd held dying hearts in my hands and restarted them. But sitting in that garage, my own heart felt like it had flatlined and no one was coming with the paddles. My mother's voice drifted up from memory. She used to say it in Mandarin first, then translate it for my father, who never learned. A surgeon's hands must be steady, but her spirit must be stronger. Mom had been a nurse in Taipei before she immigrated. She understood pressure. She understood silence. She understood what it meant to carry the weight of someone else's life and still stand straight. I finally started the car and drove home. The brownstone on Beacon Hill looked the same as always. Red brick, black shutters, the window box I'd planted with lavender because James said it reminded him of his grandmother. I parked, went inside, and changed out of my scrubs into the old Harvard medical sweatshirt that smelled like coffee and sleepless nights. I poured a glass of water and stood in the kitchen, staring at the framed photo on the counter. James and me at Martha's Vineyard, the weekend he proposed. Sunset behind us, his arm around my waist, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore. I picked up the photo and studied his face. That easy smile, those warm eyes. Had they always been performing? A surgeon learns to read bodies. Tension in the jaw, dilation of the pupils, the micro-expressions that betray pain before the patient admits it. How would I miss the signs in the man sleeping next to me every night? The next morning I went to the hospital before dawn. The corridors were quiet, that particular early morning stillness that smells like antiseptic and exhaustion. I scrubbed in for a triple bypass at 6 a.m., and for 4 hours I forgot everything. That's the mercy of surgery. When you're inside someone's chest, there's no room for your own damage. The heart in front of you is the only one that matters. After the operation, Dr. Rivera, my mentor and the chief of surgery, caught me in the hallway. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd survived a career in a field that had tried to push her out at every turn, first as a Latina woman, then as a single mother, then as someone who simply refused to be quiet. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "Long night." She studied me the way she studied imaging scans, patient, thorough, looking for what was hiding beneath the surface. "Sarah, I've known you since you were a second-year resident crying in the supply closet because you lost your first patient. You don't hide things well. Whatever it is, don't let it follow you into the ore." "It won't," I said. She nodded once, unconvinced. "My door's open, you know that." I thanked her and walked away, my chest tight. I wanted to tell her everything, but not yet. I needed more information first. A surgeon doesn't operate on a hunch. You need imaging, labs, a full diagnostic workup. Only then do you cut. That night I couldn't sleep. James was at a conference in New York, or so he said. The bed felt enormous without him, but for the first time, the emptiness felt honest. I lay awake listening to the radiator click and tick, counting the seconds the way I count sutures. Steady, rhythmic, precise. At 1:47 a.m., I opened my laptop. James and I shared a cloud account for household finances, mortgage, insurance, utilities. I'd never looked closely before. Why would I? I trusted him the way I trusted my own instruments. But trust, I was learning, is just another word for assumption. I started scrolling through bank statements, credit card records, transaction histories. What I found made my stomach drop. Withdrawals I hadn't authorized, transfers to an account I didn't recognize, and charges. Restaurants, hotels, weekend getaways, none of which I'd been part of. The earliest charge was 14 months ago. A boutique hotel in the Berkshires, 2 guests. The reservation name, James Chen and Vanessa Cole. My vision blurred. I blinked hard, forced my hands to stay on the keyboard. There were dozens of entries. Dinners, flights, a jewelry purchase I'd never seen. And woven between them, Venmo transactions with notes that read like whispers. "For last weekend, you always know what I need. Miss you already. Soon. She's on call tonight, come over." Each one was a tiny incision, precise and deliberate. By dawn, I'd screenshotted everything. I didn't delete anything. I didn't move anything. I wanted the evidence exactly where it was. Undisturbed, time-stamped, admissible. I went running along the Charles River as the sun came up. The water was flat and gray, the air sharp with late autumn cold. My lungs burned. But it was the good kind of pain. The kind that reminds you that your body still works, that you're still here, that you haven't broken yet. Rowers glided past in synchronized silence, their oars cutting the water like surgical instruments. I watched them and thought about precision, about teamwork, about how easy it is to capsize when one person stops rowing. When I got home, I found a package on the kitchen counter. My mother must have mailed it the week before. Inside was a small wooden box, and inside that, my grandmother's jade pendant, the one Macwheel Nye wore every day until she passed. Smooth, cool, the color of deep water. And tucked beneath it, a note in my mother's careful handwriting, for clarity, not anger. I held the pendant in my palm, feeling its weight. My grandmother had survived the Japanese occupation, fled to Taiwan, raised 5 children in a 2-room apartment, and never once raised her voice. She used to say that anger is a fire that burns the house you're standing in. Be water instead, she'd tell me. Water finds every crack, every weakness, every hidden passage, and it never stops. I put the pendant around my neck and whispered, "I'll try, Neely Nye, but I can't promise I won't boil." James came home that evening. He kissed my cheek, asked about my surgeries, poured himself a scotch. I watched him the way I watch a monitor during a procedure, tracking rhythm, watching for irregularities, waiting for the moment the pattern breaks. "How was New York?" I asked. "Exhausting. The conference ran long. Might have to go back next month." He didn't notice my silence. He didn't notice the jade pendant, either. Something new around my neck. Something that should have prompted a question. He was already scrolling his phone, already half absent, already performing the role of husband the way a medical student performs confidence, convincingly enough to fool everyone except the attending. When he fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my grandmother's pendant in one hand and the custody petition in the other. 2 documents. One told me where I came from. The other told me where my marriage was going. And for the first time, I realized they pointed in the same direction, forward. The following week moved in a strange double rhythm. By day, I was Dr. Chen. Steady hands, clear orders, saving lives in the OR. By night, I was someone I barely recognized. A woman building a case file the way she'd build a surgical plan, methodically, precisely, without sentiment. I tracked James's patterns, the late meetings that always fell on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the business trips that never produced receipts the firm would reimburse, the phone calls he took in the garage, door closed, voice low. I documented everything in a folder on my laptop labeled research, because that's what it was. Research before the procedure. Diagnosis before treatment. On Thursday, I visited the attorney who'd first shown me the custody petition. Her name was Margaret Liu, a woman in her 60s with sharp cheekbones and the kind of calm that only comes from decades of watching people at their worst. "I need to understand my rights," I said. She nodded. "Tell me everything." So I did. The secret filing, the financial transfers, the hotel charges. Vanessa. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in a leather-bound book with a pen that probably cost more than my first stethoscope. When I finished, she set down the pen. "Dr. Durst Captoscope. Chen, your husband made a strategic error. He filed first, thinking he'd control the narrative, but he filed sloppy. The custody petition references assets he hasn't fully disclosed, and the co-petitioner, your friend Vanessa, creates a conflict of interest that any judge will notice." "What do I do?" "You do what you do best," she said. "You prepare. You gather evidence. And when the time comes, you operate." I almost smiled. "You sound like my mentor." Smart woman. Listen to her, too. That weekend, my mother came to visit. She arrived the way she always did, with too much food, too many questions, and the kind of love that fills a room so completely you forget you were ever empty. She found me in the kitchen Saturday morning, coffee already cold, staring out the window at the bare trees along the street. "You have the look," she said, setting down her bag. "What look?" "The one you had after your residency exam. After your divorce scare in year 1. After your father passed." She sat across from me, the look that says you're carrying something heavy and pretending it's light. I didn't answer right away. I watched her hands, still strong, still precise, the hands of a woman who'd spent 30 years threading IV lines and soothing frightened patients. Finally I said, "James is leaving me. He's been seeing Vanessa. He filed for custody of the house and the accounts without telling me." Mom was quiet for a long time. She poured herself tea, added honey the way Nai used to, and took a sip before speaking. "When your father got sick," she said, "the doctors told me to prepare. They said the cancer was aggressive, that I should start accepting the outcome. Do you know what I did?" "You got a second opinion?" "I got 5 opinions, and then I got the best surgeon in the city. And then I sat by his bed every night for 7 months and refused to accept anything less than the truth." She reached across the table and took my hand. "The truth is not always a cure, Sarah, but it's always the beginning of one." I squeezed her hand. "I'm scared, Mom." "Good," she said. "Fear means you still care about what happens next." We spent the rest of the morning cooking together. Her dumplings, my father's recipe for mapo tofu, the jasmine rice that made the whole brownstone smell like home. We didn't talk about James. We didn't need to. Sometimes the best conversations happen in the silence between the ones that hurt. Monday morning, something shifted. I was reviewing surgical cases in my office when Dr. Rivera knocked and closed the door behind her, never a casual gesture. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something sensitive." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She sat down and folded her hands. "The hospital received a compliance inquiry last week. Someone flagged irregular billing patterns in the cardiac unit, procedures coded at higher rates than performed, equipment orders that don't match inventory." "That's impossible. I audit those records myself." I know, she said carefully, which is why this concerns me. The irregularities trace back to authorization codes linked to your department, but the actual entries were made by someone with administrative access. James, I whispered. Dr. Rivera's eyes widened slightly. Your husband has administrative access to hospital billing? He set up the accounting software 2 years ago. His firm consulted on the integration project. He kept back-end access for maintenance. The words tasted like ash. I gave him the credentials myself. The room went very still. Through the window I could see the Charles River, gray and flat, indifferent to the earthquake happening inside this office. Sarah, Dr. Rivera said quietly, if your husband used your credentials to manipulate hospital billing, this isn't just a personal matter anymore. It's fraud, and your medical license could be at risk. The blood drained from my face. Not just my marriage, not just my home, my career. The thing I'd spent my entire adult life building, the thing that defined me, the thing that made me Dr. Chen instead of just another heartbroken woman. All of it was on the line because I'd trusted the wrong person with a password. That night, I didn't go home. I drove to my mother's apartment in Brookline instead. She opened the door without surprise, as if she'd been expecting me. She handed me a towel for the rain I hadn't noticed, sat me at the table, and placed a bowl of congee in front of me. Eat first, she said. Then we figure it out. Between spoonfuls, I told her everything. The billing fraud, the back-end access, the custody petition, the affair, all of it connected like arteries feeding the same diseased heart. Mom listened the way she always did, completely, without judgment, with the quiet intensity of a woman who'd learned long ago that listening is its own form of medicine. When I finished, she stood and retrieved something from the shelf above the stove, a small framed photograph of my father, taken the year before he died. He was standing in the garden, holding a pair of pruning shears, smiling at whoever held the camera. Beneath the frame, Mom had typed a line in her handwriting. Heal what you can. Release what you must. Your father said that to me the night he knew he wasn't going to make it, she told me. He wasn't talking about himself. He was talking about himself. He was talking about the grief I'd carry after. I stared at the photo. Dad's eyes, warm and knowing, the same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. I don't know how to release this, Mom. She touched my cheek gently. You don't have to release it today. You just have to stop letting it hold you. The next morning, I called Margaret Liu and told her about the billing fraud. She was silent for 5 seconds, an eternity for a lawyer. This changes everything, she said. We're no longer just talking about a divorce. We're talking about potential criminal charges against him, not you, as long as we get ahead of it. I need you to file a formal report with the hospital compliance office and document the chain of access. Can you do that today? I'm a surgeon, I said. I document everything. By noon, I'd submitted a detailed report to the hospital's compliance officer, complete with access logs, authorization timestamps, and the billing discrepancies that Dr. Rivera had flagged. I copied everything to a secure drive and locked it in my office. Then I called the one person I trusted most outside of family. Dr. Kevin Park, my college roommate's brother, now a forensic accountant for the DOJ. He owed me nothing, but he showed up anyway. We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge. Kevin was the kind of person who wore cardigans unironically and spoke about spreadsheets the way poets speak about sunsets. Show me what you've got, he said. I handed him the drive. He plugged it into his laptop and started scrolling. Within minutes, his expression changed. Sarah, this isn't just billing fraud. These transactions connect to a shell company routing payments to an offshore account. Your husband's firm has been inflating hospital contracts and skimming the difference. The amounts are small individually, but over 2 years we're talking about significant money. How significant? Enough to interest the FBI. I leaned back, the coffee shop buzzing around me. People laughing, ordering lattes, living in a world where the biggest betrayal was getting their order wrong. Meanwhile, my entire life was being dissected on a 13-inch screen. And Vanessa? I asked. Kevin scrolled further. She's listed as a consulting partner on 3 of these shell company filings. She's not just the other woman, Sarah. She's the co-architect. I thought about Vanessa, how she'd cried at my wedding, how she'd brought flowers to the hospital after every long shift, how she'd texted me last week asking if I wanted to get brunch, while she was systematically dismantling my career and my marriage from the inside. "What do I do?" I asked. Kevin closed the laptop gently. "You have two choices. You can confront them, which gives them time to destroy evidence and lawyer up, or you can let the system work. File the reports, let the investigation build, and wait for the moment when the truth is undeniable." "I'm a surgeon," I said. "I don't wait for problems to fix themselves." "Then operate," he said. "But make sure the patient is prepped first." I spent the next 4 days preparing. Margaret Liu coordinated with the hospital's legal team. Kevin compiled the financial evidence into a timeline that even a jury could follow. Dr. Dotu. Rivera quietly secured the billing system against further tampering, changing every access code without notifying James's firm. And I did the hardest thing of all. I went home every night, cooked dinner, asked about his day, and pretended I didn't know that the man across the table was dismantling me piece by piece. On Friday evening, I set the stage. I told James I wanted a quiet night in just us, some wine, maybe look through old photos. He seemed pleased, almost relieved. "Date night," he said, loosening his tie. "We haven't done that in months." "Exactly," I said. I prepared a slideshow. Innocent at first, our first date at the North End, the trip to Napa, my mother laughing at our engagement party, then the wedding, Vanessa adjusting my veil, James's vows, the toast where his best man called us, the most solid couple I know. I lingered on that frame. Then I advanced to the next slide. A screenshot of the custody petition. His name. Vanessa's name. The filing date. 6 weeks before our anniversary. The room went cold. James's wine glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "Where did you get that?" "It arrived at the wrong office," I said. "Funny how the truth works. It always finds the wrong door first." He set down the glass carefully, the way you handle something fragile that's already cracked. "Sarah, I can't explain. You can try. It was a precaution. Things hadn't been good between us. You're never home. You're always at the hospital, and when you are here, you're still in surgery mode. I felt like I was living with a stranger." "So you hired a lawyer instead of a therapist?" He flinched. "It wasn't like that." "And Vanessa?" I advanced to the next slide, the hotel charges, the Venmo notes, the show company filings. Each one appeared on screen like a diagnosis. Irrefutable, clinical, damning. His face went white. "You went through our accounts. I went through my life," I said. "And I found the tumor?" "Sarah, please." 14 months, I said. Hotels, dinners, jewelry I never saw. "And the billing fraud. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think a surgeon wouldn't read the chart?" He stood up, pacing, running both hands through his hair. "The billing thing was Vanessa's idea. She said it was standard practice in consulting. Everyone does it. Nobody checks. I just facilitated the access. You used my credentials, my name, my license. I didn't think, no," I said. "I didn't think, no," I said. "You didn't." The silence stretched between us like a flat line on a monitor. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed. Another emergency, another life hanging in the balance. But in this room, the emergency was already over. The damage was done. I was just reading the post-op report. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want you to pack a bag and leave tonight. Don't contact me directly. Go through Margaret Liu. I've already filed a compliance report with the hospital. The financial evidence has been forwarded to the appropriate authorities. You'll hear from them soon." His eyes went wide with something beyond surprise. It was the look of a man who'd just realized the ground beneath him wasn't solid. "You reported me?" "I reported a crime," I said. "That it happened to involve my husband is the part I'll be processing for a long time." He grabbed his coat and moved toward the door, then turned. "Do you still love me?" I looked at him. Really looked, the way I look at a patient before I tell them what the scan revealed. With honesty, with distance, with the steady compassion of someone who knows the truth is going to hurt but delivers it anyway because that's what healing requires. "I loved who I thought you were," I said, but that person was a misdiagnosis. The door closed behind him, the lock clicked, and I stood in the kitchen holding my grandmother's jade pendant, the cool stone pressing against my palm the way my mother's hand had pressed against mine at the table. For clarity, not anger, my phone buzzed. A text from Kevin, "Federal team briefed, you did the right thing. I'm sorry it had to be you." I typed back, someone had to read the chart. A second text arrived, from an unknown number. "Sarah, it's Vanessa. We need to talk, please. I can explain everything." I set the phone on the counter and let it buzz itself quiet. At midnight, I washed the wine glasses by hand. Slow circles, the way my mother did when she needed to think. Outside, the rain had stopped, and Boston's lights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered sutures, bright, temporary, holding things together just long enough. I sat at the kitchen table and made a list the way I make surgical plans. Secure all evidence. Protect medical license. File counter petition for divorce. Change all access codes. Inform mom. Gently. Find a therapist, not optional. Breathe. At dawn, I ran along the Charles River. The trees were bare, the water steel gray, but there was something clarifying about the cold. An older man on a bench raised his coffee cup as I passed. He wore a Red Sox cap, faded almost white from years of sun. "Morning, Doc," he called. He'd seen my hospital lanyard clipped to my jacket. "Keep those legs moving." Orders received. Keep moving. Back home, I called my mother. "Dinner tonight?" "I'll make dumplings," she said. "You bring the good soy sauce." "Copy that." Before I left, I drafted 2 emails. One to a therapist recommended by Dr. Rivera, one to the Massachusetts Medical Board, proactively disclosing the credential breach and my cooperation with the investigation. I didn't send either yet. Timing matters in surgery. It matters everywhere. I stood in the kitchen with the jade pendant around my neck, and my grandmother's words in my head. Be water. Find every crack. Never stop. I wasn't breaking. I was diagnosing. And the treatment plan was mine to write. 3 months later, spring had come to Boston with its usual stubbornness, pushing through gray skies and cold mornings, insisting on bloom. I was back at the hospital full-time, but something had changed. I was lighter, not because the weight was gone, but because I'd learned how to carry it differently. The investigation had moved quickly. James and Vanessa were both indicted on federal fraud charges: conspiracy to commit healthcare billing fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering through the shell company. The amounts weren't massive by federal standards, but the breach of institutional trust was. The hospital settled quietly, changed its access protocols, and issued a statement thanking internal compliance efforts for identifying the issue. My name stayed out of it. Massachusetts General protects its surgeons the way the military protects its officers, with strategic silence. The divorce was finalized in April. Margaret Liu had been surgical in her approach. Clean, precise, no unnecessary damage. I kept the brownstone, my retirement accounts, and my dignity. James kept his lawyers, his regrets, and a federal court date. Mom moved in for a month, filling the brownstone with the smell of ginger and jasmine rice and the sound of Mandarin soap operas playing softly from the living room. She never once said, "I told you so." Instead, she said things like, "Try this dumpling, and the lavender needs water, and you look stronger today." One morning, she found me sitting on the back steps, coffee in hand, watching a cardinal hop along the fence. "You're smiling," she said. "Am I?" I touched my face, surprised. She sat beside me. "Your grandmother smiled like that when she knew the worst was behind her. How did she know?" Mom thought about it. "She said you can feel it in your stomach. Not happiness, not yet. Just the absence of dread." I nodded. That was exactly right. The absence of dread, like waking up after a long operation and realizing the patient survived. That afternoon, Margaret Liu called with unexpected news. The attorney who first showed you the custody petition, she wants to meet. Says she has something for you. I drove to the office downtown. Margaret Liu. No relation to my lawyer, just one of those coincidences that stops feeling random after a while, was waiting with a cup of tea and a small envelope. I found this in the original misfiled documents, she said. It was attached to your husband's petition but never submitted to the court. I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from James, dated the day he filed for custody. It was addressed to Vanessa. Once this is done, it read, we'll have the house, the accounts, and Sarah will be too focused on the hospital to fight. She trusts systems, not people. That's her weakness. I read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. My hands were steady, my eyes were dry. Are you okay? The attorney asked. He was wrong, I said. I trust both. I just verify now. She smiled. Smart woman. I learned from smart women. That spring, I agreed to speak at a symposium for women in medicine hosted by the hospital. I hadn't planned to share anything personal. I prepared a talk on cardiac surgical outcomes and gender disparities in residency training. But standing at the podium, looking out at a room full of women in white coats, residents, fellows, attendings, some with dark circles under their eyes, some with the quiet, fierce look of people who fought for every inch, I changed my mind. I was going to talk about survival rates today, I said, but I think I'd rather talk about survival. The room shifted. Phones went down. Eyes came up. 6 months ago, I discovered that the two people I trusted most in my life had been systematically betraying me, personally, professionally, financially. My husband and my best friend had built a parallel life underneath mine, and they'd used my own credentials to do it. I paused. The silence was complete. I'm a surgeon. I'm trained to fix things, to find the problem, cut it out, close the wound, and move on. But you can't operate on your own heart. You can't be both the surgeon and the patient, so I had to learn a different kind of medicine. The kind where healing doesn't come from precision. It comes from patience, from asking for help, from admitting that the strongest thing you can do is say, I don't know how to do this alone. A young resident in the third row wiped her eyes. Someone told me recently that the truth isn't always a cure, I continued. But it's always the beginning of one. I believe that. I believe that every woman in this room has faced a moment where the truth was harder than the lie, where the diagnosis was worse than the symptoms, where staying silent would have been easier than speaking up. And I believe that the reason you're still here, still fighting, still healing, still showing up, is because you chose the truth anyway. The applause was quiet at first. Then it grew, warm and steady, like a pulse returning. After the talk, Dr. Rivera was waiting by the door. She didn't say anything. She just hugged me. Brief, tight, the kind of hug that says everything words would ruin. Your father would be proud, she said. My mother already told me, I replied, but it's nice to hear it twice. That evening, I drove to the cemetery in Brookline where my father was buried. The grass was fresh cut, the headstone clean. Someone, Mom, probably, had placed a small pot of chrysanthemums beside it. I knelt down and ran my fingers over his name. Hey, Dad, I said softly. I finished the operation. The wind moved through the trees, gentle, unhurried. Not the kind they teach you in med school, I continued. The kind where the patient is you, and the only instrument that works is the truth. I placed 2 things on the stone. The jade pendant, not to leave forever, just to let it rest there for a moment, to let Nee and Dad share the same ground. And beside it, a dried chrysanthemum petal from my wedding bouquet. 2 symbols, heritage and healing, finally side by side, no longer in conflict. Mom says you'd be proud, I whispered. I think you'd just be relieved I finally learned to ask for help. A cardinal landed on the fence nearby, bright red against the gray stone, and sang 3 sharp notes before flying off. On my way home, I stopped at the Charles River. The water was calm, reflecting the first stars of the evening. I stood on the footbridge and took off my wedding ring. I'd worn it out of habit for weeks after the divorce, the way a patient still feels a limb after amputation. Phantom weight. Phantom loyalty. I held it up to the light one last time. A perfect circle. The symbol of something that was supposed to be unbreakable. Then I dropped it into the water. It sank without a ripple. My phone buzzed. Mom, are you coming for dinner? The dumplings are getting cold. On my way, I typed, save me the crispy ones. 6 months after the divorce, I hung a small frame in my office at the hospital. Inside was a photograph my mother had taken without my knowing, me at the kitchen table laughing at something she'd said, the jade pendant catching the light around my neck. Beneath it, in Mom's careful handwriting, she healed what she could. She released what she must. It wasn't the end. It was the next chapter. And for the first time in years, I was the one writing it. If this story found you at a time when betrayal feels like the end of everything, take a breath. You don't have to forget what happened. You just have to stop letting it hold you. And if you've ever rebuilt your life after someone tried to dismantle it, tell your story. Someone out there is sitting in a parking garage right now, staring at an envelope, wondering if she's strong enough to open it. She is. She just doesn't know it yet.